Rachel's face went pale, her fingers tightening around her champagne glass. Mark, the man she had risked everything for, stiffened, his usual arrogance melting into something dangerously close to fear. Ethan smirked, raising his glass in their direction. "Didn't expect to see me, did you?" Before they could react, the lights dimmed and the massive LED screen flickered to life. And then the evidence played. Gasps filled the room. Rachel's infidelity, Mark's deception, the text messages, the hotel footage, everything. By the time the screen went black, silence reigned. Mark's fists clenched. Rachel swayed on her feet. Ethan stepped forward, voice calm but lethal. "Checkmate." But before we dive deeper into this insane turn of events, I have a question for you. Let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. Now, let's get into it. Ethan Carter had everything a man could ever want, or at least, that's what everyone believed. At 42, he was a highly respected financial consultant in Los Angeles, the kind of man who could walk into any high-end restaurant in Beverly Hills and be greeted by name. His career had taken off early thanks to a sharp mind, relentless work ethic, and an instinct for making the right moves at the right time. He wasn't just successful, he was the man other men envied. A multi-million-dollar portfolio, a sleek silver Aston Martin parked in the driveway of his modern glass-walled estate, and a reputation for being one of the best in the business. His life was polished, refined, and carefully built, piece by piece. But the real trophy of his success, at least in the eyes of the world, was his wife Rachel. At 39, she was effortlessly elegant. Blonde hair always perfectly styled, body toned from Pilates sessions at an exclusive studio, a radiant smile that made her the center of attention at every social event they attended. They had been married for 12 years, a love story that seemed straight out of a romantic film, the perfect power couple. They traveled the world together, dined in Michelin-starred restaurants, and hosted extravagant parties in their Beverly Hills home, where the guest list read like a who's who of LA's elite. To everyone looking in, Ethan and Rachel Carter had it all, and for years, Ethan believed it too. He was the kind of husband who remembered anniversaries, who took Rachel on spontaneous weekend getaways to Paris just because, who made sure she had everything she ever wanted. He had worked tirelessly to build a life where they would never have to worry about anything, and in return, all he wanted was loyalty, trust, the kind of love he had given her without question. But perfection, as Ethan would soon learn, was nothing more than an illusion. It started with little things he told himself didn't matter. Rachel had always been busy, but lately, her late nights at work had become more frequent. She claimed to be buried under projects, but Ethan couldn't remember the last time she actually seemed stressed about work. There were new routines, subtle shifts in behavior that felt out of place. She had never been one to obsess over the gym, but suddenly she was going almost every day, coming home glowing, looking fresher than ever, her body more sculpted than he remembered. She started shopping more too, adding expensive pieces to her wardrobe, dresses that hugged her curves, heels she claimed made her feel confident, lingerie that Ethan never got to see her wear. She was on her phone more, texting late at night, and when he walked into the room, she would subtly tilt the screen away. She laughed at messages, but never shared what was so funny. Ethan brushed it off at first. He had always trusted Rachel. Why wouldn't he? If she said she was working, she was working. If she needed time to herself, she deserved it. But as the weeks passed, the unease inside him grew. It wasn't just the gym, the phone, or the new clothes. It was something deeper, something unspoken. She had stopped looking at him the way she used to. Their conversations, once effortless, had become rehearsed. Her kisses felt empty, mechanical. She used to call him during the day just to hear his voice, but now hours would go by without a single text. He would wake up in the middle of the night, reach for her, and find nothing but cold sheets. Ethan tried to tell himself it was just a phase. Relationships had ups and downs. Maybe she was just distracted. Maybe she was going through something and didn't know how to talk about it. He even confronted her one night, gently, over dinner at their favorite rooftop restaurant. "Is everything okay?" he had asked, watching her carefully. Rachel had smiled, too easily, too perfectly. "Of course, babe. Just a lot on my plate lately." She reached across the table, squeezed his hand, and for a moment, Ethan almost believed her. Almost. But doubt was a parasite, and once it took hold, it never let go. One evening, after another long day at work, Ethan walked into the house and was met with silence. Rachel's white Mercedes was in the driveway, but the house felt empty. He called out her name and received no response. She had probably just stepped out of the shower or was wrapped up in one of her endless phone calls. Shrugging off his jacket, he made his way to the kitchen, where her purse sat on the counter alongside an open bottle of wine. Next to it, something unusual: her phone, unlocked, screen glowing. Rachel never left her phone unattended, not anymore. A quiet unease settled in his chest as he glanced at the screen, and then, as if the universe itself had decided to rip the blindfold from his eyes, a message preview popped up. "Last night was amazing. Same time next week? Mark?" Ethan's breath caught in his throat. His fingers twitched at his sides. His mind screamed at him to look away, to leave it alone, but his body ignored him. His hand moved on its own, picking up the phone. He swiped it open before logic had a chance to intervene. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he scrolled. There it was, a long string of messages, some playful, some explicit, all of them shattering the world he thought he knew. "Miss Ya ready. I couldn't stop thinking about you today. I hate sneaking around, but damn, it's exciting." His grip tightened on the phone as his stomach churned violently. Mark Hastings, a man he had shaken hands with, a man he had stood beside at fundraisers, a man who had been in his home, drinking his whiskey, complimenting his wife, his life, pretending to be nothing more than a friend. His hands trembled as he kept scrolling, each message another stab straight into his gut. They had been meeting for months. Hotels, private lunches, stolen moments when she was supposed to be working late. His beautiful, sophisticated wife, the woman he had adored for over a decade, had been lying to his face, betraying him in the most intimate way possible. His legs felt unsteady as he placed the phone back exactly where he found it, his body moving on autopilot. He turned away from the counter, gripping the edge of the marble island to steady himself as the memories flooded in. Their wedding day, Rachel in a white lace gown, looking at him with eyes full of love and promises. The honeymoon in Italy, the nights spent tangled in sheets, whispering about their future. The way she used to reach for his hand in crowded rooms, press against his side as if he were the only person in the world who made her feel safe. Had it all been a lie? He replayed the moments in his head, dissecting everything. The time she had come home late, hair slightly tousled, making excuses about client meetings. The extra showers, the new perfume, the distant look in her eyes when she thought he wasn't watching. The way she had stopped laughing at his jokes, stopped asking about his day, stopped caring. A deep, burning rage coiled inside him, battling with the crushing weight of heartbreak. How could she do this to him, to their marriage, to everything they had built? He had given her the world, had worked himself to exhaustion to make sure she never had to lift a finger, had stood by her side when she wanted to start her interior design business, supporting her dreams even when it meant sacrificing his own time. And this was how she repaid him? His fingers curled into fists as he breathed through the overwhelming urge to smash something. He forced himself to stay calm, to think. Anger would get him nowhere. This wasn't the moment to explode. Not yet. Upstairs, he heard the water shut off. Rachel was home, completely unaware that her carefully crafted web of lies had just come crashing down. Ethan straightened, exhaling slowly, forcing himself to suppress every emotion boiling inside him. He wasn't going to confront her now. No, that would be too easy, too predictable. She had spent months playing him for a fool, treating him like an idiot who would never suspect a thing. If she thought she had control of the situation, she was dead wrong. Ethan Carter wasn't just a man who had been cheated on. He was a man who built his success on strategy, patience, and knowing when to make his move. And Rachel had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Ethan barely slept that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Rachel's steady breathing beside him. She had kissed him goodnight as if nothing had changed, as if she weren't carrying the weight of betrayal on her shoulders. He wanted to wake her up, demand answers, scream, break something, but what good would it do? She would deny it, spin some ridiculous excuse, maybe even turn it around on him. No, this wasn't the moment to react. This was the moment to prepare. He needed proof, undeniable, irrefutable proof that would obliterate any excuse she could come up with, and once he had it, he would make them both regret ever thinking they could play him for a fool. The next morning, Ethan made a call, not to a friend, not to a lawyer, but to someone who could get him exactly what he needed, the kind of man who specialized in exposing secrets. Within hours, he was sitting across from a private investigator in a quiet, nondescript office downtown. The man, older, sharp-eyed, with the weary expression of someone who had seen too many lives destroyed, listened as Ethan laid it all out. The texts, the suspicious behavior, the name, Mark Hastings. The investigator took a sip of coffee, nodding as he jotted down notes. "I'll start with the basics," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Phone records, credit card statements, tracking her movements. If she's meeting him, I'll find out where, when, and how often." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I want everything. Every hotel, every dinner, every text message. I don't just want to know she's cheating. I want to burn their entire world to the ground." The investigator gave him a knowing look. "Then you came to the right guy." The next few days were torture. Ethan went through the motions of normal life, pretending everything was fine while the investigator dug into Rachel's secret life. Each time she left the house, he wondered if she was rushing into Mark's arms. Each time she sent a message, he wondered if it was another whisper of love meant for someone else. He could barely look at her without wanting to shake her, without wanting to scream that he knew. By the end of the week, the first wave of evidence came in. The investigator met him at a small cafe, sliding a manila envelope across the table. Ethan's fingers were steady as he opened it, but as he flipped through the pages, rage twisted through his chest. There it was. Bank statements showing charges from hotels across the city. Receipts from expensive restaurants he had never been to. A timeline mapping out her so-called work trips, each one aligning perfectly with Mark's business travel. And then there were the photos. The first was of Rachel walking into a boutique hotel, her hair down, wearing a dress Ethan had never seen before. The next, Mark following her inside minutes later. Other images captured them laughing at a restaurant, his hand brushing her arm, the way she leaned into him with that smile, the one that used to be just for Ethan. The last photo was the worst. Rachel in the passenger seat of Mark's car, her lips pressed to his, her hands tangled in his hair. Ethan closed the folder, his vision blurring at the edges. He gripped the table, steadying himself, breathing deeply until the firestorm in his chest became something cold and lethal. "That's not all," the investigator said, watching him closely. "Hastings is a repeat offender." Ethan looked up. "What do you mean?" The investigator pulled out another file. "Your wife isn't the first. Hastings has a pattern. Married women, usually from his social circle. He charms them, strings them along, and when it all goes to hell, he always comes out clean while their lives implode. 3 years ago, he had an affair with his project manager's wife. The guy ended up losing his job, moving out of state. Last year, another one, this time the wife of a business partner. The husband went bankrupt. Hastings picked up his failing company for pennies on the dollar." Ethan exhaled slowly, a grim, bitter smile forming. "So, he thinks he's untouchable." The investigator leaned back, arms crossed. "So far, he's been right, but if you're looking to change that, I'd say you've got more than enough to ruin him." Ethan nodded, his mind already racing. Rachel had betrayed him, but Mark Hastings? Mark had made a sport out of destroying marriages, out of humiliating men who never saw it coming. That ended now. This wasn't just about exposing an affair. This was about taking down a man who thought he was invincible, and Ethan was going to make sure he fell hard. Ethan didn't waste time. The moment he left the investigator's office, he sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mind was already 10 steps ahead. Rachel was a liar, a coward, a woman willing to throw away everything they had built for the cheap thrill of sneaking around like a teenager. But Mark? Mark was something worse. A predator, a man who had done this before and walked away unscathed, letting the women he seduced and the men he betrayed deal with the fallout. Ethan wasn't going to be just another name on that list. If Mark thought he was untouchable, then Ethan would make sure he learned exactly how wrong he was. But he couldn't do it alone. He pulled out his phone, searching for Olivia Hastings' number. He had only met her a few times, charity events, social gatherings, the occasional dinner where their conversations had been nothing more than polite small talk. But none of that mattered now. She deserved to know, and more importantly, she needed to help him make them both pay. He hesitated only for a second before dialing. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up, her voice smooth but cautious. "Olivia Hastings." "Mrs. Hastings, this is Ethan Carter. I need to speak with you, privately." There was a pause, then a shift in her tone. Curious, slightly wary. "Ethan, what is this about?" "It's about our spouses," he said evenly, "and the fact that they've been sleeping together behind our backs." Silence. It stretched so long that for a second he wondered if she had hung up. Then she exhaled sharply. "Where are you?" "Name the place. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She didn't hesitate. "The Belmont Lounge, back room, make it 20. When Ethan arrived, Olivia was already seated at a secluded corner booth, a glass of white wine untouched in front of her. She looked every bit the polished, elegant woman he had always known her to be. Dark hair pulled into a sleek bun, designer dress hugging her slim frame, her expression unreadable. But as soon as he slid into the seat across from her and set the envelope of evidence on the table, he saw the crack in her composure. She stared at it for a moment before slowly reaching for it, her hands unnaturally steady as she flipped through the contents. Ethan watched as her face remained eerily blank, her eyes scanning the photos, the receipts, the text messages. But then, suddenly, her fingers curled around the edges of the papers, knuckles whitening, her breath coming shorter. She closed the folder with a snap, lifting her gaze to meet his. For a moment he thought she might cry, but then something shifted. There was no sadness in her expression, no heartbreak, just a slow, burning fury that darkened her hazel eyes. "That son of a bitch," she murmured, her voice eerily calm. She tapped a manicured nail against the folder. "How long?" "Months," Ethan said, watching her carefully. "Since at least March, probably longer. My investigator pulled everything." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Unbelievable. I knew Mark had his habits. The late meetings, the unexplained business trips, the way he started treating me like a piece of furniture in our own home. But I never thought he'd be this careless." Ethan leaned forward. "Careless or not, he's done this before. My investigator found at least 2 other husbands who lost everything while Mark walked away clean." Her jaw tightened, and then she did something that surprised him. She reached for her wine, took a slow sip, and then smirked. It wasn't a kind smile, it was cold, calculating. The smile of a woman who had just decided to become something dangerous. "I assume you didn't call me just to break the bad news," she said, tilting her head. "You have a plan?" Ethan matched her smirk. "I do, but I need you on board." She sat back, crossing her legs, the fire in her eyes growing. "Tell me everything." He laid it out for her, every step, every detail. The gala next week, the guest list filled with LA's most powerful, the opportunity to publicly dismantle Mark and Rachel in front of everyone who mattered, the evidence, the exposure, the sheer humiliation they would endure when their secret affair was no longer secret. And Olivia? She didn't just listen, she sharpened the plan. "They need to feel it everywhere," she said, her voice steady but full of venom. "Not just socially. We take their reputations, their wealth, everything that makes them feel invincible. Mark has millions tied up in business deals. I know exactly where to hit him where it hurts." Ethan nodded, already impressed. "And Rachel?" Olivia's smirk widened. "She loves her comfortable life, doesn't she? Loves playing the role of the perfect wife while sneaking off like some desperate housewife in a bad soap opera. We take that from her. You file for divorce the second the evidence goes public. No settlement, no mercy. Make sure she walks away with nothing but shame." Ethan exhaled, a slow sense of satisfaction settling over him. He had expected Olivia to be angry. He hadn't expected her to be ruthless. He raised his glass, "To making them pay." Olivia clinked her glass against his, her smile cold as ice. "To making them suffer?" Ethan walked into the house that evening with a calm he hadn't felt in days. He had a plan now, and when a man has a plan, he has control. Rachel was in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of wine, her back turned to him. She looked effortlessly beautiful, as she always did, dressed in a sleek, off-shoulder black top and fitted jeans. Once, he would have crossed the room and kissed her without a second thought. Now, every movement she made felt like part of a performance, a role she was playing in the perfect marriage she had already destroyed. He smiled as if nothing had changed. "Hey, babe." She turned, blinking in surprise, then gave him a small, almost hesitant smile. "Hey." You're home early." Ethan walked over and kissed her on the cheek, lingering just long enough to see if she would pull away. She didn't, but there was a stiffness in her posture, a slight hesitation that she covered up quickly. "Figured I'd surprise my beautiful wife," he said smoothly, taking the wine bottle from her hands and pouring himself a glass. "How was your day?" She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, an old nervous habit. "Oh, busy. The usual." Lied. He nodded, pretending to accept her answer, then leaned against the counter, watching her. "We should do something this weekend, just the two of us. Maybe drive up the coast, get away for a bit." For a split second, he saw the flicker of panic in her eyes before she smiled again. "That sounds nice. I just need to check my schedule." More lies. Ethan hid his smirk behind his wine glass. "Of course, let me know." That night he was softer, more present, more attentive. He asked about her day, let her talk about meaningless things, acted as if he was hanging on to her every word. When she spoke, she hesitated at times, as if she were recalibrating, trying to remember what part of her life she had to keep hidden from him. He kissed her goodnight longer than usual, and for the first time in months, she hesitated before kissing him back. That small, nearly imperceptible moment of guilt was all he needed to see. Rachel knew she was betraying him. She just didn't care enough to stop. Over the next few days, Ethan played his part flawlessly. He left small gifts for her, complimented her more, ran his fingers down her back as he passed her in the hallway. He cooked dinner, brought home flowers, planned romantic evenings, and she responded, hesitantly at first, but then, almost eagerly, as if she were convincing herself that things were still normal. She wasn't stupid. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she had to be wondering if he knew. But Ethan was careful, never giving her a reason to suspect anything. He started asking casual, seemingly harmless questions. "How was work today?" She answered too quickly. "Busy." He tilted his head slightly. "Yeah? What did you work on?" She hesitated just long enough. Just some client stuff, meetings, calls." Lies. He let it go, nodding as if satisfied. But later that night, he replayed the conversation on his phone. The recorder he had placed in his office was crystal clear, her voice, her excuses, all neatly documented for when the time came to confront her with the weight of her own deception. One night, he pulled her into his arms before bed, brushing a kiss against her temple. "I miss you," he murmured. Rachel stilled for half a second before forcing a soft laugh. "I'm right here." But she wasn't. She was already somewhere else, in another man's arms, in another life, where she thought she could have everything without consequences. Ethan tightened his arms around her, just for a moment, then let her go. Let her believe she was still safe. Let her believe she had won, because when the time came, she wouldn't just lose him. She would lose everything. Ethan didn't believe in coincidences, but when he stepped into the exclusive Redwood Club that evening, fate handed him the perfect opportunity. The dimly lit lounge was filled with men in tailored suits, sipping whiskey and talking deals, the air thick with quiet arrogance. And there, leaning casually against the mahogany bar, was Mark Hastings. The bastard looked relaxed, too comfortable, swirling a glass of bourbon in his hand while laughing at something the bartender had said. Ethan felt the slow, controlled burn of rage in his chest, but his face remained calm. He wasn't going to waste his fury on a public outburst. No, this had to be measured, controlled, like everything else in his plan. Mark turned slightly, and when he spotted Ethan, his lips curled into an easy, knowing smirk, the kind of smirk that said he thought he had already won. "Ethan Carter," he drawled, raising his glass in mock toast. "Didn't expect to see you here." Ethan approached slowly, his steps deliberate, his own expression unreadable. "Mark." Mark gestured to the bartender. "Get this man a drink, put it on my tab." He turned back, eyeing Ethan with amusement. "How's Rachel? She wasn't feeling well last time I saw her." Ethan didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just let the words settle between them, watching for the slightest crack in Mark's confidence. There was none. The man was too sure of himself, too certain that his little game had gone unnoticed. Mark leaned in slightly, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial tone. "You have a great wife, Ethan. I bet she keeps you on your toes." The glass in Ethan's hand nearly cracked under the pressure of his grip, but his face remained impassive. Mark had no idea that Ethan knew everything. that his every movement, every lie, every moment of stolen intimacy had been documented and catalogued. That soon, his carefully curated life would crumble in front of the entire city. Ethan exhaled slowly, setting his drink down with a soft clink against the marble bar. He let a small, knowing smile curve his lips, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Enjoy the gala, Mark," he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. "It'll be unforgettable." Mark chuckled, clearly amused by what he thought was a harmless statement. "Oh, I plan to." Ethan gave him one last look before turning and walking away, leaving Mark to his drink, his arrogance, his ignorance. The man had no idea that he was standing on the edge of a cliff with no ground beneath him. By the time he realized it, he would already be falling. Ethan had expected Rachel to sense something was coming. She wasn't stupid. She had been walking a tightrope for months, juggling her deception with the carefully maintained illusion of their marriage. But even he hadn't expected her to be this desperate. The night before the gala, Rachel set the stage perfectly. Candlelit dinner, a home-cooked meal, something she hadn't done in years. She poured his favorite wine, dressed in a silk slip that clung to her curves, and smiled at him like she used to. Ethan played along, eating, drinking, letting her touch his hand across the table. Every movement was calculated on both sides. He knew she was trying to keep him close, and she thought she was succeeding. Then, as they finished their meal, she reached for his hand and took a deep breath, her expression shifting into something delicate, hesitant. "Ethan," she whispered, her fingers squeezing his, "there's something I need to tell you." He lifted a brow, pretending concern. "What is it?" Her lips parted, and for a second he saw it, the flicker of uncertainty, of fear. But then she steeled herself and dropped the bombshell. "I'm pregnant." The words should have sent shock through him. They should have stopped his heart, made his mind race with possibilities, and for the briefest moment they almost did. But Ethan had spent the past 2 weeks peeling back every layer of her deception, dissecting every lie she had told. And something about this felt off. His grip on her hand remained firm, his face carefully unreadable. "Pregnant?" She nodded, swallowing hard as if she was overwhelmed by her own fabricated emotions. "I just found out. I was waiting for the right time to tell you." Ethan kept his breathing steady. His entire body wanted to react, to demand proof, to expose the lie right then and there. But he didn't. Instead, he leaned back slightly, studying her. "Are you sure?" Rachel's eyes darted away for a fraction of a second before she smiled again. "Of course. I took a test a few days ago, and I made an appointment with my doctor." A few days ago. Convenient timing, considering how strained things had been lately. Ethan nodded, letting silence stretch just long enough to make her shift in her seat. He let his fingers trace over the rim of his glass, pretending to process the news. "This is unexpected," he murmured. She bit her lip, feigning nervousness. "I know we haven't talked about it in a while, but maybe this is what we need. A fresh start." A fresh start. The irony nearly made him laugh. Instead, he reached for her hand again, running his thumb over her knuckles. "This changes everything," he said softly, watching her closely. "I'm going to need some time to process." Relief washed over her features, and he knew then that she believed she had won. She thought she had pulled him back in, that he would put aside his suspicions, his anger, and hold on to her for the sake of this fabricated pregnancy. Later that night, when she went to take a shower, Ethan sat on the edge of their bed and pulled out his phone. A few taps, a few calls. Within minutes, he had access to her recent medical records. His contact at the private clinic owed him a favor. And just like that, the truth stared him in the face. There was no pregnancy. No recent visits to an OBGYN. No blood work. No ultrasounds. Nothing. Rachel had lied. She had stood in front of him, looking him in the eyes, and spun a desperate, last-minute fantasy to keep him from walking away. Ethan let out a slow breath, setting his phone down. His hands were steady, his mind clear. He didn't feel anger, not this time. He only felt certainty. She thought she had control. She had no idea that by tomorrow night she would lose everything. Ethan parked in the underground garage of an upscale restaurant, away from prying eyes, away from anyone who might recognize him. The meeting had to be discreet. No slip-ups, no last-minute surprises. Olivia was already waiting in a private dining room, a glass of whiskey in front of her, her nails tapping against the table in rhythmic precision. She looked calm, composed, but there was a sharpness in her gaze, a hunger for justice that matched his own. He slid into the seat across from her, his own drink appearing within seconds, courtesy of the well-trained staff who knew when not to ask questions. Olivia leaned forward, her voice low. "Everything is in place. My lawyers have filed preliminary inquiries into Mark's finances. By Monday, the SEC will be knocking on his door." Ethan smirked. "That's fast." She lifted a shoulder, swirling her glass. "I have powerful friends, and Mark is arrogant. He's been sloppy with his investments, offshore accounts, hidden assets, unethical partnerships. He thought he was invincible." She met Ethan's gaze, a slow smile forming. "By the time I'm done, he won't just lose his reputation, he'll lose his entire empire." Ethan exhaled, the satisfaction settling into his chest. This wasn't just about Rachel's betrayal anymore. It was about dismantling a man who had built his success on the destruction of others. He pulled his phone out and scrolled through his messages. "The videographer is confirmed. I gave him explicit instructions. No shaky phone footage, no amateur work. I want this moment captured in perfect, brutal clarity." Olivia nodded approvingly. Every camera angle, every reaction, every piece of their shame immortalized. Ethan took a sip of whiskey, savoring the burn. "I also spoke with my lawyer. The divorce papers will be served at the peak of the night, right after the footage plays." Olivia smirked. "Poetic." They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the weight of what was coming. Then Olivia spoke again, her voice softer but no less lethal. "Rachel tried something, didn't she?" Ethan lifted a brow. "Why do you say that?" She gave him a knowing look. "Because women like her, when they feel control slipping, they grasp at anything. So what was it? Tears? Begging? Some fabricated crisis?" He let out a slow chuckle, shaking his head. "She told me she was pregnant." Olivia laughed, an actual, genuine laugh full of dark amusement. "Oh, that's desperate and completely predictable. She didn't realize I'd checked her medical records within minutes." Olivia shook her head, leaning back in her chair. "She thinks she can manipulate her way out of this. That's the difference between us, Ethan. Women like Rachel and men like Mark, they play checkers. But you and I," she lifted her glass, "we play chess." Ethan clinked his glass against hers. "And tomorrow night, we checkmate them both." They went over every last detail, the seating arrangements, the order of events, when to trigger the footage, when to expose the evidence. Olivia ensured that the right people would be there. Mark's potential investors, Rachel's high-profile friends, every powerful name that mattered in their social and professional circles. "Humiliation is only part of it," Olivia said, scrolling through her tablet. "We need to make sure the aftermath sticks. Mark won't just be embarrassed, he'll be destroyed. Every contact he had, every deal he was brokering, it all vanishes the second that video plays." Ethan's jaw tightened. "And Rachel?" Olivia's expression darkened. "She'll be exiled. These women, the ones who live off reputation, off illusion, once that crumbles, they have nothing. You make sure she leaves with nothing but the clothes on her back." Ethan sat back, studying Olivia. "You're ruthless." She smirked. "So are you." They finished their drinks, both of them fully aware that tomorrow night everything would change. By the time the gala was over, Mark and Rachel wouldn't just be exposed, they would be ruined. Ethan stepped out of the sleek black Aston Martin, adjusting the cuff of his perfectly tailored tuxedo. The night air was crisp, laced with the scent of expensive cologne and freshly cut roses lining the entrance of the Langston Grand Ballroom. Paparazzi flashed their cameras, capturing the arrival of the city's elite, but all eyes shifted when the second car door opened. Olivia Hastings emerged, stunning in an emerald silk gown that hugged her figure, diamonds glinting at her throat and wrists. She took Ethan's offered hand, their synchronized grace giving off an unmistakable energy, power, control, and something far more dangerous. The valet nodded, barely concealing his curiosity as he took the keys, and just like that, the plan was already in motion. Ethan and Olivia didn't rush inside, no, they made an entrance the way kings and queens did. Deliberate, unrushed, fully aware of the ripple they were sending through the room before they even stepped in. The moment they crossed the threshold, conversation faltered. The hum of laughter and clinking champagne glasses dimmed as guests turned, whispering behind manicured hands and polished smiles. Ethan saw it instantly. The wide eyes, the exchanged glances, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Ethan Carter and Olivia Hastings? Together? He spotted Rachel near the grand bar, a champagne flute delicately balanced in her fingers, her red dress a shade too bold for the evening's understated elegance. She had been laughing, smiling, wrapped in the effortless glow of someone who still believed she had everything. But the second she saw him, saw them, her entire body went rigid. Her grip on the glass faltered, and for the first time in months, Ethan saw something real in her eyes. Panic. Beside her, Mark stood in mid-conversation with a cluster of executives, his trademark smirk in place, his hand lazily tucked into the pocket of his custom tux. But when his gaze landed on Olivia's hand resting lightly on Ethan's arm, the color drained from his face. His smirk twitched, faltered, then vanished completely. Ethan fought the urge to smile. "Oh, you feel it now, don't you?" He held Olivia's hand just a little tighter as they descended into the heart of the gala, navigating the sea of silk gowns and tailored suits like they owned the room. Every step, every glance, every knowing smirk was calculated. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about letting Rachel and Mark watch their worlds crumble before they even knew what had hit them. Rachel's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she just watched Ethan, watched Olivia, watched the silent message they were sending with every effortless movement. This isn't your night. This isn't your story anymore. Mark, to his credit, recovered faster. He straightened his posture, downed a sip of his drink, and forced a smirk back onto his face, though it lacked the arrogance it had earlier that week at the club. He said something low to Rachel, and she blinked rapidly, nodding, but Ethan could already see it happening, the cracks forming in the perfect facade they had so carefully built. They were unraveling. Ethan smiled as a waiter passed, plucking a flute of champagne from the tray. He raised it slightly in their direction, just enough to be noticed. Rachel's breath hitched. Mark clenched his jaw. The night had barely begun, and already they knew. Something was coming. Something they wouldn't be able to escape. Ethan led Olivia onto the dance floor with effortless ease, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back as the live orchestra played a smooth, elegant waltz. The crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the ballroom, highlighting the polished perfection of their movements. To everyone watching, they looked like a power couple in their element, two people entirely at ease, laughing, exchanging private whispers, lost in their own world. But the true spectacle wasn't them. It was the destruction happening just beyond the dance floor. Rachel was watching, her face pale beneath the soft lighting, her champagne flute untouched in her trembling hands. Ethan could feel the weight of her stare burning into him, could practically hear the frantic thoughts racing through her head. The way her fingers clenched the stem of her glass, the way she shifted her weight, desperate to get his attention. It was all so predictable. But he didn't look at her. Not yet. Instead, he focused on Olivia, twirling her effortlessly, drawing a delighted laugh from her lips. She played along perfectly, letting her fingers linger against his chest, tilting her head up as if they were sharing an intimate secret. Mark, standing stiffly near the bar, had stopped pretending to enjoy the party. His drink remained untouched, his confident posture now just an illusion. He wasn't relaxed. He wasn't in control. Olivia's expression was too calm, her smile too sharp. She wasn't bitter, wasn't broken. She was winning. And Mark, for once in his life, had no idea how to fix it. Rachel couldn't take it anymore. She abandoned her glass on the nearest table and marched toward Ethan, her heels clicking against the marble floors. The mask of a perfect socialite had completely cracked, her eyes wild, her breath unsteady. "Ethan," she hissed, reaching for his arm as he and Olivia stepped off the dance floor. "Can we talk? Alone?" He finally met her gaze, letting just the barest hint of amusement flicker in his expression. "Talk?" he repeated, as if the concept was foreign to him. Rachel swallowed hard, her fingers tightening on his sleeve. "Please, just for a second." He tilted his head slightly, as if considering it. Then, with deliberate slowness, he pried her hand off his arm, his grip firm but not aggressive. Not now, Rachel. Her eyes widened. Ethan, please. But he was already turning away, offering Olivia his arm once more. Shall we get a drink? He asked smoothly, guiding her toward the bar, leaving Rachel standing there in stunned silence. She hadn't expected that. She had expected anger, an argument, an outburst, anything but this quiet, controlled rejection. Mark, on the other hand, wasn't as silent. His voice carried through the space, low but sharp. Olivia, he said, forcing a casual chuckle that didn't match the tension in his eyes, you've been avoiding me all night. Olivia arched a brow, sipping her champagne. Have I? Mark's jaw tightened. Let's talk, privately. Olivia gave him a long, measured look. Then she smiled. Cool, effortless, the kind of smile that had always made Mark believe he was in control. But not tonight. I don't think so, darling, she murmured, brushing past him without another glance. Ethan watched the way Mark's fingers curled into a tight fist, the way his throat bobbed as he struggled to keep his composure. He wasn't used to this. Being the one left behind, Rachel and Mark were unraveling, coming apart at the seams, and neither of them could do a damn thing about it. Ethan leaned against the bar, taking in the sight of his wife and her lover standing in the center of the ballroom, shaken and humiliated. He swirled the champagne in his glass, taking a slow, satisfied sip. The night was far from over. The real show hadn't even begun. Ethan took a slow sip of his champagne, feeling the crisp bubbles dance across his tongue. The weight of the moment pressed into his chest, not with anxiety, but with sheer, cold anticipation. He glanced at Olivia, who met his gaze with a knowing smirk. The final act was about to begin. He reached into his pocket, suddenly pressing the small button on his smartwatch. It was a simple command, one that had been carefully coordinated with the event's AV team in advance. A 5-second delay, just enough time for everyone to settle, to focus. The chandeliers above the ballroom shimmered as the lights dimmed slightly. A hush swept through the crowd as the massive screens mounted along the grand hall flickered to life. At first, the guests assumed it was a scheduled event, perhaps a tribute to the charity or a message from the host. But then the footage began, and everything changed. A grainy black and white security video appeared on the screens, footage from the lobby of the Palazzo Royale Hotel. The timestamp in the corner read March 17, 11:42 p.m. Rachel, wearing a sleek black dress that Ethan didn't recognize, stepped into the frame, glancing over her shoulder before making her way to the elevator. A second later, Mark appeared. He wasn't subtle. He walked up behind her, his hand grazing her lower back in a gesture too familiar, too intimate. The footage cut to them stepping into the elevator together. Whispers rippled through the ballroom like wildfire. The screen transitioned to another clip, this time from the Lexington Grand 2 weeks later, Rachel and Mark at the front desk checking in under false names. Another shot, Mark leading her through a dimly lit hallway, his hand gripping her wrist. The footage played in complete, devastating silence. Rachel's breath hitched audibly across the room. Her body went rigid, her face drained of all color. Mark's reaction was even worse. He inhaled sharply, eyes darting around, searching for a way out that didn't exist. The world around them had shrunk to nothing but this unforgiving moment. But Ethan wasn't done. The video cut to a series of text messages displayed in massive high-resolution clarity across the ballroom. Mark Hastings. Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. Rachel Carter. I needed that. He doesn't even touch me anymore. Mark Hastings. Maybe it's time you stop pretending. You belong with me. The crowd gasped, some murmuring in disbelief, others glancing at Ethan to gauge his reaction. But he stood there, calm, sipping his drink as if he were watching a predictable movie unfold. Another clip played. This one was clearer, in full color. Footage from a luxury suite at the St. Regis, secretly recorded from the balcony security camera. Rachel and Mark were inside, tangled together, kissing like desperate teenagers. Mark peeled off his jacket. Rachel laughed, tilting her head back as she let him press her against the window. And the room froze. Silence. A slow, suffocating silence. Then, as if someone had suddenly released the tension in the air, the explosion happened. Glasses clinked hastily against tables, muted gasps filled the space. A few guests awkwardly turned away, while others stared, entranced. unable to look away from the absolute destruction happening in real time. Rachel stumbled back, her heel catching on the floor as she turned wildly, looking to Ethan, desperate, panicked. "Ethan!" But he wasn't looking at her. He was staring at Mark, who had gone completely still, his face twisted into something between horror and rage, his hands clenched at his sides, his nostrils flaring, but his usual smug confidence was nowhere to be found. He had been outplayed. Rachel reached for Ethan's arm, voice breaking. "Please, I can explain." He turned then, slowly, deliberately, as if he were finally acknowledging her existence. His expression was unreadable, his voice smooth, detached. "Explain what, Rachel?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. What could she say? The evidence had already spoken for her. Ethan took a measured step toward her, lowering his voice just enough so that only she could hear. "Did you think you'd get away with it?" His voice wasn't angry, it was worse. It was calm, icy. "Did you really think I'd never find out?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I made a mistake." Ethan let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head. "No, Rachel, a mistake is picking the wrong dress for a party. A mistake is forgetting to send an email. What you did, that was a choice, over and over again." Rachel turned frantically, looking for help, for support, for anything, but no one came to her rescue. The crowd had already chosen their side. Then came the final blow. A man in a crisp navy suit stepped forward, a large envelope in hand. "Mr. Carter?" Ethan took it without hesitation, then turned back to Rachel, holding it out. "These are for you." Rachel swallowed, hesitating before reaching out with trembling fingers. She flipped open the envelope, and when her eyes scanned the words at the top, her breath hitched painfully. "The divorce papers." The silence in the room deepened. Rachel let out a choked sound. "Ethan, please. Don't do this here. We can fix this." He tilted his head, as if amused. "Oh, sweetheart." He leaned in slightly, his voice just a breath against her ear. "We're way past fixing." Rachel's entire body trembled. And then, as if the final act of fate itself, Olivia stepped forward, her own stack of papers in hand. She smiled sweetly at Mark, too sweetly, and extended them toward him. "And these," she said smoothly, "are for you, darling."
Mark looked down, blinked once, then realized what they were. His hands tightened around the envelope. "Prenup violation. Moral clause. Complete financial ruin."
Olivia's voice was pure satisfaction. "You always told me to prepare for the unexpected, Mark, so I did."
Mark's jaw clenched so tightly it looked painful, but there was nothing he could say. No deal he could negotiate, no lie that could undo what had just happened.
Ethan stepped back, adjusting his cufflinks before raising his glass one final time. To Rachel and Mark, his voice carried through the room, each word cutting deep. To their secrets, their lies. And most of all, his smirk was slow, controlled, deadly. To their downfall. Rachel covered her mouth, her mascara-streaked tears falling freely now. Mark stood, silent, his breathing heavy, his entire life collapsing in real time. The room erupted. Laughter, gasps, whispers. A few guests raised their own glasses in mock toasts, while others quickly distanced themselves from the disgraced couple. The storm had hit full force.
And there was no escaping it now.
Mark's face twisted with rage, his hands clenched into fists as the room erupted into whispers, gasps, and barely concealed laughter. His carefully built empire, his pristine reputation, his perfect life, it was all collapsing around him, reduced to nothing but scandal and disgrace. And the man standing at the center of it all, completely unfazed, was Ethan. The veins in Mark's neck bulged, his entire body coiled with tension. His breathing came fast and heavy, his pupils blown wide with fury. He had lost. And worse than that, he had lost publicly. Ethan stood there, calm, composed, and completely in control, adjusting his cufflinks as if this was nothing more than an inconvenience. He wasn't gloating, he wasn't rubbing it in, he was simply watching Mark fall apart.
And that was what pushed Mark over the edge?
With a roar of pure rage, Mark lunged. He swung wildly, his right fist aiming for Ethan's jaw, but Ethan was ready. He saw it coming before Mark had even moved, years of instinct kicking in. With a quick, calculated step to the side, he dodged effortlessly, letting Mark's momentum carry him forward into nothing. Mark stumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet, but recovered just in time to swing again, this time more reckless, more desperate.
Ethan let him get close enough to see the moment he realized his mistake.
And then, with precise, practiced ease, Ethan struck. His uppercut landed squarely under Mark's jaw with a sickening crack, snapping his head back violently. The force of the hit sent Mark staggering, his body slamming into a nearby table, sending champagne glasses crashing to the floor. A stunned silence fell over the ballroom, but nobody moved to interfere. Mark groaned, shaking his head as he tried to push himself upright, but Ethan wasn't done. "You think this is a game?" Ethan's voice was low, controlled, deadly. Mark barely had time to lift his head before Ethan's fist connected with his ribs, the impact sending a dull, visceral thud echoing through the room. Mark gasped, doubling over in pain, his face contorted in agony.
A broken rib, maybe two.
Still, he refused to go down. He tried to swing again, his movements sluggish now, but Ethan caught his wrist mid-air and twisted it sharply. Mark let out a pained yell, his knees buckling slightly as he cradled his arm to his chest.
Ethan leaned in close, his voice cold and lethal. "You don't get to play the victim, Mark."
Blood dripped from Mark's split lip onto his once pristine tuxedo, staining the fabric. His breath was ragged, uneven, his body barely able to hold itself upright, and yet, even through the pain, his pride refused to let him back down. "You," he rasped, spitting blood onto the marble floor. "You think you're better than me."
Ethan didn't answer with words.
He answered with another punch, straight to Mark's face. The force sent Mark crashing onto his back, sprawled out on the floor, completely defeated. His nose was visibly broken, blood flowing freely down his face, his hands weakly grasping at the ground as if trying to find something to hold on to.
But there was nothing left for him to cling to.
Security finally stepped forward, but they didn't rush to Mark's aid. Instead, they simply loomed over him, waiting for permission. Ethan glanced down at him, his expression blank. "Get him out of here."
The guards didn't hesitate. They didn't ask if Mark was okay. They simply grabbed his arms and began dragging him toward the exit, his feet scraping uselessly against the marble.
Mark tried to resist, but there was no fight left in him, no power, no control, no one willing to save him. And as they hauled his broken, bloodied form out of the ballroom, Ethan turned back to Rachel, who hadn't moved an inch. Tears streaked her face, her mascara smeared, her hands trembling as she stared at him like she no longer recognized the man standing before her. She opened her mouth to speak, to beg, but Ethan simply tilted his head, daring her. She didn't say a word. She knew better. The king had taken back his throne, and she had just lost everything. As Mark was dragged out of the ballroom, bloodied and humiliated, Olivia followed, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She moved with the confidence of a woman who had already won before the fight even started. By the time she reached him at the entrance, he was slumped against the wall, trying to catch his breath. His once flawless tuxedo was ruined, his blood staining the crisp fabric, his collar disheveled, his hands shaking. He had lost the physical fight, but he didn't yet realize that was just the beginning. She didn't give him a chance to speak. Instead, she pulled a thick manila envelope from her clutch and dropped it onto his lap. "Sign them," she said, her voice cold, detached. Mark blinked up at her, still dazed. "What? The divorce papers?" She folded her arms. "I'm done, Mark. And unlike you, I actually plan ahead. My lawyers have already frozen our joint accounts. I've taken control of every liquid asset, and per the terms of our prenup, you walk away with nothing." His breath hitched, his swollen lip trembling as his mind caught up with what was happening. "You..." She tilted her head. "Oh, and did I mention the SEC?" She leaned in slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. "By this time tomorrow, you'll be under federal investigation for fraud. Thanks to all those little financial adjustments you thought I didn't know about?" Mark's eyes widened. "You wouldn't." Olivia smiled, I already did. He let out a strangled sound somewhere between a cough and a laugh as he stared at the papers in his lap. His hands trembled as he flipped through them, realizing just how thoroughly she had dismantled him. His company, his wealth, his entire legacy, gone overnight. Olivia didn't wait for him to respond. She simply stepped back, adjusted her diamond bracelet, and strode toward the valet, leaving him slumped there like a discarded piece of trash. Meanwhile, inside the ballroom, Rachel still stood frozen, staring at Ethan as if he were a stranger. Her face was streaked with ruined makeup, her hands gripping the divorce papers Ethan had handed her. She flipped through them with frantic, jerky movements, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Ethan, please," she whispered, lifting her gaze to him. "We can fix this." "I'll do anything." He exhaled slowly, looking at her with calm detachment. "We're past that, Rachel." His voice was final. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You don't mean that." He stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "I meant it the second you decided to lie to my face, to betray everything we built, and now you're going to live with the consequences." She shook her head, gripping his arm. "I'll fight this." Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "No, Rachel, you won't." Her breath hitched, but before she could speak again, a man in a suit approached. "Mr. Carter, per your instructions, the financial transfers have been finalized. The property division is uncontested." Rachel's eyes snapped to Ethan. "What does that mean?" He took the papers from the man, glanced over them once, and then handed them to Rachel. "It means that by tomorrow, you won't have access to any of my assets. The house, sold. The accounts, closed. Your credit cards, canceled." He let the words sink in. "You leave with exactly what you brought into this marriage." Her lips parted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But everything you had," he continued mercilessly, "came from me. The lifestyle, the luxury, the invitations to the places you love so much. It's all gone now." Rachel staggered back, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Ethan leaned in, his voice deadly soft. "So go ahead, Rachel, fight. But just know that by the time you even find a lawyer who'll take your case, you'll be doing it from a one-bedroom apartment, alone, while the world moves on without you." Her breath left her in a strangled sob. She knew she had nothing left. And Ethan? He didn't feel a single ounce of regret. Mark sat in his nearly empty penthouse, the once luxurious space now a cold, hollow reminder of everything he had lost. The floor-to-ceiling windows that once overlooked the skyline now felt like walls closing in, trapping him in a reality he could no longer escape. His phone vibrated endlessly on the countertop, but the calls weren't from investors, business partners, or friends. They were from debt collectors. The news had hit every financial outlet by morning. Hastings Global was officially dead. Stocks had plummeted overnight, wiping out his remaining assets in a matter of hours. Investors pulled out, scrambling to distance themselves from the sinking ship, and his board of directors had voted to remove him as CEO before lunch. His lawyer had called, voice tight with urgency. "Mark, the IRS is coming for you. Fraud, tax evasion. There's enough to put you away if you don't handle this carefully." But what could he do? He had no leverage, no power, no one left in his corner. The SEC had frozen all his remaining accounts, pending investigation. His offshore assets, seized. His remaining properties, sold at a loss. And the worst part? It wasn't even Olivia who did this to him. She had simply set the stage. He was the one who had left a trail of destruction, thinking he was too untouchable to be caught. Now, the same people who once shook his hand, toasted his success, envied his power, they weren't even returning his calls. He took a slow sip of the cheap whiskey he had found in the back of his cabinet, the burn of it doing nothing to numb the growing panic in his chest. No money, no business, no friends. And soon no freedom. The knock on his door sent a violent shudder through him. He already knew who it was. He didn't move at first, gripping the glass tightly, staring blankly at the empty space where his furniture used to be. Then, as the knocking grew louder, more forceful, he forced himself up, his body aching from the brutal beating he had taken at the gala. When he opened the door, he was met with two men in dark suits, their expressions void of emotion. "Mark Hastings?" He exhaled slowly. Yeah. One of them pulled out a folder. You've been formally served by the IRS and SEC. We'll be conducting a full investigation into your financial misconduct. Mark let out a breathy laugh, shaking his head. You can't be serious. The agent didn't flinch. You'll need to surrender your passport by end of day. And that was it, the final blow. He slammed the door shut behind them, resting his forehead against the wood. This was really happening. He was no longer Mark Hastings, real estate mogul, billionaire businessman, power player. He was nothing. Rachel sat in the dimly lit apartment, her fingers trembling as she stared at the empty call log on her phone. No response. For the past 3 days, she had sent messages, voicemails, emails, anything to get Ethan to answer her. But he never did. Not once. She had lost everything. She had tried to return to her old social circles, but the invitations had dried up night. The same women who once begged to have lunch with her no longer took her calls. The high-end boutique she used to frequent no longer greeted her with warm smiles. They simply saw a woman who no longer mattered. She had nothing. No mansion, no designer clothes, no access to the life she had been so desperate to hold on to. And worst of all, no Ethan. She had thought he would at least listen to her. She had thought that after everything he would still care, that deep down he wouldn't be able to truly cut her off. But he had. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from her lungs. He had moved on without her. The world had moved on without her. And for the first time, as she sat in that small, lifeless apartment, with no money, no friends, no way out, she finally understood the true cost of betrayal. Ethan leaned against the glass railing of his penthouse balcony, a glass of 25-year-old scotch in hand, watching the city lights spread out below him. The view was breathtaking. Los Angeles in all its midnight glory, stretching infinitely in every direction. This was his new life. His new beginning. Gone were the suffocating walls of the mansion he had once shared with Rachel. Gone were the shadows of deception, the silent doubts, the quiet betrayals, lurking beneath the surface. Now, it was just him, free, untouched, unburdened. The modern penthouse was sleek, minimalist, filled with clean lines and elegant design. Every piece of furniture had been carefully chosen, not for ostentation, but for comfort and style. A fresh start, a life without Rachel's presence poisoning it. He lifted his glass, rolling the amber liquid inside before taking a slow sip, letting the smoky warmth spread through his chest. This was victory. His phone buzzed on the polished bar counter behind him. He turned, already knowing who it was before he even checked. Olivia. He picked up, putting her on speaker as he walked back to the balcony. To what do I owe the pleasure? She laughed softly, the sound rich with satisfaction. Turn on the news. Ethan smirked, grabbing the remote and flicking on the large flat screen mounted on the wall. And there it was. Mark Hastings, in handcuffs. The broadcast showed him being led out of a federal building, his once pristine designer suit rumpled and disheveled, his face a mess of bruises from their last encounter, his hands bound in front of him as agents escorted him into an awaiting black SUV. The scrolling news banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking. Real estate mogul Mark Hastings arrested on federal fraud charges." The footage cut to a reporter outside the courthouse. The sources confirm that Mark Hastings is facing multiple charges, including tax evasion, securities fraud, and financial misconduct. The SEC and IRS have been investigating his company for months, and today authorities finally made their move. Hastings' fall from grace is one of the most dramatic financial scandals in recent years, with experts predicting that he may face up to 20 years in federal prison. Ethan exhaled slowly, letting the moment settle in. Mark was finished. No amount of money, no last-minute legal maneuvering, nothing could save him now. Olivia's voice came through the phone, satisfied, triumphant. "We did it. He's ruined." Ethan took another sip of his drink, watching the screen as the camera zoomed in on Mark's defeated, bloodshot eyes, his expression one of sheer hopelessness. He smirked. No mercy for the guilty. He turned off the TV and leaned back against the couch, content in a way he hadn't been in years. Rachel had been erased from his life. Mark had been destroyed. And Ethan? He had won. He set the empty glass down and stood by the window, looking out over the city as his mind drifted. Betrayal, lies, revenge. It all led to this, the cold, merciless balance of justice. And now, as he stood at the peak of his own success, there was nothing left to hold him down. His phone buzzed again, this time with a new message. Unknown number, Ethan, please. Just one conversation, just tell me why you can't forgive me. Rachel. He stared at the message for a long moment. Then, with calm finality, he deleted it. She wasn't a part of his story anymore. And now I ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed? Have you ever had your trust, your love, your loyalty ripped apart by someone you thought you could trust? What would you do if you had the chance to set things right? Would you forgive? Or would you do what Ethan did? Would you make them pay in full? Loyalty is priceless. Betrayal, however, comes at a cost. In some debts, they demand to be paid in full. The End, a masterpiece of cold, ruthless revenge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of justice, resilience, and redemption. Every action has consequences, and every betrayal carries a price. Stay tuned for more gripping tales of courage, strength, and the unbreakable will to rise above deceit. Together, we can create a world where loyalty is valued, trust is sacred, and dignity is never taken for granted. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Let us know in the comments below.